Welcome to the Tory Burch Foundation Business Webinar Program presented by Bank of America. Today's session is Importing and Exporting 101, and we're going to learn how to work with vendors overseas and find advantages in your supply chain. I'm Molly Heffernan, Vice President of Marketing for the Tory Burch Foundation, and I am very excited about today's speaker because Caitlin Murphy, the founder and CEO of Global Gateway Logistics, a global freight forwarding firm based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Caitlin is also a Tory Burch Fellow from our 2019 cohort and just an incredible member of the Tory Burch Foundation community. So we're so excited to have Caitlin here. And I just found out, talking to Caitlin right before we got on, that it's the 7th birthday of her business. So if you're feeling it, wish Caitlin and her company a happy birthday in the chat. After Caitlin's presentation, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So please make sure to put your questions in the Q&A box. That way there, we won't miss them and all the good fun happening in the chat. We're going to do our best to get through as many as we can. And today, feel free to take notes, take screenshots, do what helps you learn best. The session will be recorded and will hit your inboxes after. Before we get started, we do want to learn a little bit more about all of you here today. We want to know if you're an entrepreneur, how long you've been in business, and really what you're going through. So answer the questions that come up on your screen and make sure that you select open if prompted. Are folks able to see the questions that are coming up on screen? Oh, no. Okay. A resounding no from everyone in the chat. Oh, yes. Okay. Starting to see them now. After you've answered, please navigate back to the chat and we'll get started shortly. Oh, I'm seeing that folks can't see them. All right, folks, thank you for letting us know that we can't see them. We'll do a tech check later and figure out the issue, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna pass it over to Caitlin and we won't delay any further, and we're gonna start talking about some importing and exporting 101. So thanks for bearing with us, everyone, and Caitlin, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Molly. And what a great birthday present to be able to be here with all of you on the 7th anniversary of the starting of Global Gateway Logistics. So I am Caitlin Murphy again. I'm founder and CEO of Global Gateway Logistics. We are a global freight forwarding company, and we are headquartered here in St. Louis, but we actually have offices in St. Louis, Houston, LA, and soon to come in Vietnam. So we are excited. And let me share so we can get started. Okay, well, welcome. Hopefully you're all in the right spot for the Importing and Exporting 101 presentation. When Tory Burch Foundation and I started discussing what type of content, I really was torn between doing a transportation only seminar versus importing and exporting. And the reason I chose importing and exporting is because if you don't have the basic building blocks of risk and compliance with importing and exporting, logistics is something that comes way down the road, and something that you're going to need a whole nother set of webinars and information on, which we're always happy to give as well. So a little bit about my company. I kind of talked about our geographic stance. We really focus on the main transportation of air freight, ocean freight. We do ground freight. We work with a partner on customs clearance, warehouse management, and then something we called hospitality logistics. A lot of the products that our firm handles is across the spectrum of commodities. So we ship everything from luxury household goods and consumer goods to hotel furniture, to rice and pet food ingredient, raw materials. So there's really not many commodities we can't ship. But our main focus has always been on how do we marry together an incredible service with technology. Because freight forwarding in and of itself is the arrangement of transportation of your cargo. And so that's a service. And we wanted to figure out how can we excel in that gold standard service with being able to really provide technology. So we have an online digital portal that all of our clients have access to manage their global logistics. In terms of the areas that we service around the world, there's really there's no country that's out of the realm. We definitely, obviously, are risk compliant, so we don't ship to and from countries that are on any sort of U.S. sanctions list. Other than that, we have partners throughout the world. And so global freight forwarding is incredible just for networking in general. We actually have we're a part of an organization that has over 9,000 partners in different countries around the world. We partner with them to facilitate door-to-door shipping. And so really we have customers that say, hey, we just need the shipment from, the port of Shanghai to the port of New York. We can facilitate that. But we also have customers that say, we need you to pick up at our factory in Vietnam and ship it to Denver, Colorado. We facilitate that too. So it's somewhat of an a la carte in terms of the services that we provide. Um, Another huge part of our mission is our Gateway for Good program. So before I had a company name, before I had, any customers or any agents, partners, I had a dream that we could use logistics for good. And so our Gateway for Good program actually takes a portion of proceeds each month. And we choose different organizations and different social responsibilities that we feel that we need to take. And we donate to them. We donate time and funding. We'd love any shout outs for any organizations that you would love us to consider. We would be happy to do that. Okay, so what we are going to cover today, I'm going to try to move through these a little bit quickly because I definitely want to leave time for you all to ask questions. But we're going to understand the basics of importing and exporting. So we're going to take a little bit from imports and a little bit from exports, and then we're going to marry it together with Incoterms and global shipping. So without further ado, we're going to start with Incoterms. Incoterms are something that when I first started in logistics and someone used that term, my first response was, "What is that? I have no idea what that is." And so it is massively important. And so for us, this was right out of the gate. This was something I knew that I wanted to explain in this webinar. So what we're going to get into are what are Incoterms, why they exist, and how to use them in your contracts, purchase orders, or sales orders. So what are they? They're 11 terms that have been set by the International Chamber of Commerce for use in contracts, purchase orders, and quotations, mainly for B2B business sales and purchases of tangible goods. So these, and we'll see in a further slide what they look like, but these really help to create transparency and clarity around what the responsibility is of the buyer and of the seller. And so I love to use the example of Alibaba. So if you've ever ordered anything off e-commerce overseas, like an Alibaba website, you might be amazed at first and go, wow, this is a great price for this product. And they might say, okay, and here's your logistics price. And you say, wow, okay, that's a great price for the logistics. But one thing that is not always clear is who's responsible for the import duties. And I cannot tell you how many times we've had people come to us and say, well, I imported these goods on Alibaba and now they're stuck in customs. I didn't know I had to do anything for customs. And so right there in their little sales order or purchase order, it'll have a three-letter term, Incoterm. And that's where we then advise them and say, well, here, actually, based on this Incoterm, your seller's telling you you're responsible for this. So it can be, and it's not just e-commerce, it happens all the time, right? Anytime people are kind of ordering things for the first time overseas, shipping things for the first time overseas, if the Incoterms are forgotten, it can be a big issue. Usually either on the buyer side or the seller side, someone is going to call out an Incoterm. Typically, if you are selling a product, you're going to dictate that term. There are cases where a seller can dictate a term and tell you, hey, we want, FOB or X works for this shipment. And then you have the ability as a seller of product to determine if you want to sell your product based on that term. They exist to divide cost, risks, and responsibilities between the buyer and the seller. They also guide parties in international trade contracts to fulfill different tasks, such as shipping or insurance. I can tell you as a freight forwarder, we almost always ask for every shipment what the Incoterm is. We have some clients that ship the same Incoterm every single shipment. And so we know to look for it on their commercial invoice or their packing list. There's also some, though, that have lots of different suppliers around the world, and every supplier may be different. One supplier might say, we ship on FOB terms, and another might say, well, we ship on DAP terms. So really, it's guiding you to figure out, and I'm going to show you a great tool that I built years ago to help break it down visually. But essentially, it's going to dictate along that process of trade is what is the buyer responsible for in terms of the insurance or the risk, and what are they responsible for with transportation, both the service and the cost. And then third, they reduce issues of misunderstanding between buyer and seller. As you can imagine, when product shows up at a US port and all of a sudden you didn't have an Incoterm and all of a sudden it's just abandoned at port because the seller says, well, we only ship it to the US port, but they didn't communicate that with you. Obviously, it can cause a lot of issues with customs, a lot of cost, and things like that. So this is like a nice little cheat sheet I had created. So Incoterms also changed in 2020. They didn't change a ton, only a few, were either edited or replaced. But you'll see, we're going to talk through this slide for just a second. So up here, you're going to see these are essentially all of the aspects of an international shipment, both import and export. So this kind of is after your goods have been manufactured, they're ready to go. Depending on your payment terms with your clients, because payment terms are very different than Incoterms, right? So your payment terms might be 50% down, and then 50% upon the shipment's arrival overseas. And I'm just talking, we'll use an export as an example. So essentially, that's what they're going to be. That's where Incoterms, the activity is going to start, is once they're ready to go out and the goods have been packaged. So then you'll see here along the left side, these are the 11 Incoterms, right? And I won't go through each one specifically, but I'll just call out a few things. So some of these Incoterms you can use on any mode of transportation. Ex Works, which a lot of sellers, if you are a seller of a product and you want to export your product overseas, but you say, I am so terrified, Caitlin, to do anything related to export customs, import customs, shipping, I don't want to do any of it. That's okay. There's an Incoterm for you, and you would just simply put on your purchase order, Ex Works is the term, and I'll show you in the next slide where you can put these terms and where you're going to find them. But you would just simply say to them Ex Works and then your factory address, and that tells them, okay. And you'll see here where buyer is highlighted in green. That means they're responsible for everything from here on out. And then there's some too where they just say, okay, we'll deliver it to the port and then we want you to pick it up and take care of it. You just tell us what terminal you want to take it to. And so this is essentially how to read this graph. Again, there's certain terms that are only used for ocean freight or sea freight. And then there's some, again, that are able to be used for any transit mode. So I think the interesting thing is there's a lot that get thrown around. I'm going to call out the top 5 Incoterms that we typically see. So Ex Works is definitely one. I already went through that. FOB, which is right here, free on board. Essentially, that means you are responsible to take it all the way to the port with your transportation carriers, and then your buyer books it with their freight forwarder or their entity and tells you, okay, we booked it with MSC shipping line, and here's the address that your freight forwarder needs to deliver this container to. And so that's how FOB will work. There's a few that actually include insurance, which is very important. So cost and freight, or CFR and CIF, are two that are very important because they do include the ocean freight, but CIF actually includes the insurance. So that means you would be going out to your freight forwarder and saying, we need to insure this shipment all the way up to the destination terminal, right? Because let's say, and believe me, I've been in logistics long enough. I kind of glossed over my background a little bit, but I have been in logistics for most of my career, worked for several different freight forwarding companies, and I can tell you, I have seen the worst of the worst. I've had containers that fall off that literally look like building blocks that have just fallen off the ship in the middle of the ocean. I've had shipments where, there was a fire on board. The container gets lost or misplaced. So anything can happen. I highly, highly, highly recommend getting freight insurance. All of your freight forwarders should be able to provide that for you. It's based on the valuation of your cargo. We a lot of the times will also insure for the cost of freight. So let's say, your freight gets damaged and your buyer says, well, we want to file a claim. We want a whole new widget from you. Well, you can actually go back to the freight forwarder and say, I want to file a claim for this. And the freight forwarder is able to, if they've covered transportation costs, they'll settle up the claim with you for your product, but also cover the transportation costs for the transportation of the repaired product or the new product. So definitely anytime you see an Incoterm with I in it, insurance is the key to that. And then finally, there's a couple things too. So if you have a great freight forwarder, you can also use these D terms. So delivered at place unloaded and delivered duty paid. I highly suggest only using DDP when you're purchasing from a country, country or selling to a country that you are very familiar with their customs laws. Otherwise, I highly, if you have a great freight forwarder that says, hey, yeah, we can ship this door to door for you, you can actually exclude the customs piece of it. So the duties and taxes you can exclude for the buyer. Which I highly recommend, because we're going to get into it in just a minute of why that's important, because anyone who imports to any country typically has to be an importer of record with their country. So that is super important. Again, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the suggested format is just some notes, essentially how to put them into contracts. So the best practices is to not just put the 3-letter Incoterm, but to also follow it with the name of the place, the port, the address. So for instance, we put an example, FOB Shanghai port, if you wanted to say port, Incoterms 2020, and it just provides even more clarity. So that is Incoterms in a nutshell. And then we're going to talk about where to find it on how to use it in a contract. So I just pulled a basic sales order example. This is one area you'll see, this is written out actually. And I liked this example because you may also find that the Incoterms are fully written out instead of in just their acronym. But typically you'll find them on purchase orders, sales orders, commercial invoices under terms of delivery, shipping method, terms of sale, and then sometimes it'll even have a box that just says Incoterm. But really scan your purchase orders and if you're importing and you're getting a purchase order from overseas, definitely double check that. Make sure that there's an Incoterm on it. And if you have questions on what that Incoterm is entailing, you're always welcome to reach out to us or your current freight forwarder. Okay, so import checklist. I tried to kind of condense as much as I could. I told the ladies, like, I hate slides that have a ton of detail. However, when it comes to importing, you can't get around detail. So over here in green, you'll see highlighted kind of the four main areas that we think every importer should double check when they're getting ready to import. Contracts and compliance, super, super key. Do your due diligence. I'll get to that in a second. And research every vendor. Due diligence, it means looking at the country risks, your partner risks. What are your purchasing risks? You might have to finance some of that. Is that going to be something that you need to be able to run through with ownership or with your investors or management? Building a compliance checklist, we say include activities, things like credit checks. Dun& Bradstreet's a great one that we recommend. There's also a lot of international credit check companies. Look at vendor ratings. You can typically find vendor ratings on lots of different websites. Um, we there's a lot of supplier compliance tools too. A lot of them you have to purchase, but a lot of softwares now exist that help you run through that entire process through their system. And then also government registration. If you have a commodity that's let's say restricted or regulated, and you have to have that registration in China even to import your product, make sure that you've done that due diligence. I will stop here and tell you, I think our government does an incredible job on trade. So trade.gov is a great place to start. I've kind of linked a website here, trade.gov/perform due diligence. Highly recommend it. They kind of give you a guide, but further than that, you can connect with people in the government, both with the International Trade Association and with the US Commercial Service. And their main job is to support importers and exporters. They will help you get into new countries and help you look for markets. So if you say, hey, I don't even know the first place to look to try to find any interested buyers. Definitely reach out to your U.S. Commercial Service, your Export District Council. I actually sit on the Midwest Export District Council here in St. Louis, and one of our jobs is to field questions and provide resources to potential exporters that want to put their product in different markets. And then what that actually allows you to do is it opens you up to a whole like entire Rolodex of tools and contacts. I actually just attended a international trade mission with our state of Missouri, and was able to go over and market our company to Italian companies. So there's and there's grants that you can get for things like that. So I highly recommend doing that type of activity. And then nonetheless, they will help you with compliance. They will make sure that you have everything you need, because they have partner associations and partner offices overseas. To import, you do have to have requirements. So let's say you've passed contracts and compliance, your order's ready to import, and you're like, I'm ready to go. And this would also be, I'll just highlight, I didn't quite put things in order. It's okay. You can get a shipping quotation before your documents, or you can wait for your documents and then get a shipping quotation. But essentially, the documents you are going to have to import to the US are commercial invoice, packing list, certificate of origin in some cases, and then applicable certificates depending on commodities. As you know, anything that's medical devices, even things like face masks and some beauty products, you may be subject to have like an FDA clearance or an FDA certificate. Those are things too you can double check and definitely determine what's needed for your particular commodity. I would recommend going to a customs broker directly for that type of advice. They are experts in commodities. I'll throw out here, I didn't put it on here, but what you'll find on a lot of these documents is something called the HTS code. I'm going to call it out here in a few slides, but it's the harmonized tariff schedule number. So every commodity around the world has a 10-digit number, and that really helps US and global trade to determine what commodities have been shipping back and forth to different countries. It helps customs brokers assign what the duty rate is. And really, that's a must on every document. You will get stopped. Do not worry. You will get stopped by a freight forwarder or a customs broker if you don't have those. But for shipping quotation, after the contract with the supplier is signed, and you know what your shipping responsibility is or your Incoterm, then you can reach out to forwarders for a quote. Typically, the forwarders are going to require that you have, the origin, the destination. Sending them a packing list is great and say, hey, here's what everything we're shipping, and here's the value. And then the commodity codes are important too. I also say too, always put in delivery due dates. Super, super important, because your forwarder's gonna look for all the different types of modes of transportation that work for you, but they may not necessarily choose the one. If you haven't told them, hey, it has to arrive by this date, they may not necessarily choose that one. And then customs. Biggest key here on this slide is customs. So if you want to import product to the United States, you have to be an importer of record for commercial goods. That is through the Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, and the goods can be subject to duty, licenses, and other fees. Many importers have to get established with CBP and have to have a bond on file. It is a very, very easy process, though. Do not let customs scare you, the word customs. So typically, your freight forwarder can guide you through this process, or if you have your own customs broker, they will guide you through the process. It's a couple of forms. So you fill out to get set up as an importer of record. I will note here too, Customs has an incredible program they just released a couple years ago. It's an ACH program. So essentially, if you're importing lots of goods, what their program does is it assesses the duty of, let's say, everything that comes in September, and your due date for that duty is not due until mainly like the middle of the following month. And it's great because everything is condensed. You see what your duty is, and it's very clean and neat. Also, I will say, a center of excellence, if you look for those, it's a government organization. If you have issues classifying your product, because customs is going to ask what type of products you're shipping, go to the center of excellence, go to the CBP. There's a great help desk and a phone number that they will help guide you through that process to even declare what your commodity code is. So I have this great example. I might fast forward through a few parts of it, but this is something that kind of dictates that customs process in a much easier way.
Commercial goods arriving into the U.S. by air, land, or sea are subject to import laws, duty taxes, and fees. What are some examples of commercial goods? A purse bought online from a retailer in Italy, glasses manufactured by a factory in China, or even a souvenir sent back to the U.S. but purchased while traveling abroad. To lawfully enter foreign imports into a U.S. port of entry, which can be air, land, or sea, you must obtain approval from CBP through the import process, which varies based on the merchandise. You should always reach out to a CBP import specialist at the Center of Excellence and Expertise before importing into the USA. Let's take a closer look at the CBP import process. The first step is when someone purchases foreign goods with plans to have those items come into the U.S. Once those goods are available, the seller or manufacturer ships them to the United States. For example, small shipments may be consolidated into a container or sent by airplane, truck, or rail. These smaller packages are often cleared through the CBP import process by logistics companies hired by online sellers and may arrive right to your door. Larger shipments are loaded into containers and placed on different modes of transportation. When the vessel operator receives the goods, they provide the shipper with a bill of lading, which serves as a receipt. This is required for the importer to file an entry with CBP. An electronic cargo declaration must be transmitted to CBP 24 hours before the cargo is laden aboard the vessel. CBP then determines whether the shipment requires further examination upon arrival. Once the vessel arrives and CBP has permitted the release of the cargo, the containers are offloaded and transported from the port.
Okay, and that's kind of really where I wanted to hit on, was just that basic initial process. And so hopefully, and again, these tools come from directly from CBP's website, which is amazing. They've invested a lot to make sure that the marketing is simple and easy for everyone to understand. I'll let you all kind of navigate to that website. Again, it's just cbp.gov. And then we will move on to export goods, because I know our time is limited today. So we kind of just went through all of the basics of import. Now we're going to switch to exporting. I am a big proponent of exporting because I travel the world with my job. I see commodity shipping all over, and I know how incredible US products are. And I'm a big advocate to get US products in other markets overseas. And so what we're going to talk about is kind of how to get started with that. So really what comes next after you've said, okay, I'm ready to enter into a foreign market. Creating an export plan is where I would start. And an export plan is essentially doing your research, understanding what demand is overseas, your competition, pricing, doing an entire analysis essentially of the region, understanding too compliance things like registration, licensing, and import duties. I will say, when you're just getting started with exporting, always look at countries that have free trade agreements with the US. It's lower tariff, sometimes duty free, a lot easier with the import export clearance process. But another thing I'll pitch out too is, the US Commercial Service is incredible with helping small business find markets overseas. I talked about those trade missions. Almost every state has their own trade missions. You can also go to lots of different sites like the International Trade Association. Like I said, US Commercial Service is really great too. And they will help develop that export plan with you. And sometimes their services are free of charge. There's also, they market a lot of international trade shows. So that's a great thing to put into your export plan too, because you might not even know where to begin and know what the competition is, and you just want to explore. A lot of states will actually give you grants to go overseas to international trade shows, which I highly recommend. And then shipping and logistics. So after you've completed your first sale and you've determined that Incoterm and you've said, okay, we've got a great freight forwarder. We want to handle, DAP. So we want to handle everything to deliver to our client, but we just don't want to handle the import clearance in, let's say, Italy. Our buyer's going to do that, and they've agreed to it. And they're an importer of record in their country. So now it's time to really look at, what modes of transportation. Did you already ship, or did you already quote logistics in the purchase order? So sometimes you'll see too, and it's completely up to you. Every company is different. Some will put shipping and logistics in their purchase orders or in their sales quotations. Some will actually just say, shipment will be quoted upon, readiness of goods. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Just be aware that if you are quoting shipping in your sales quote, please make sure you have a clause that the rates are subject to change. As you all probably read in the news and maybe experienced with some of your own companies, there's a lot of volatility in global shipping. So the rates change all the time. Certain ports, like right now, we're all talking about, how there could potentially be a port strike on the East Coast, which would disrupt trade. So things like that happen can raise your shipping pricing. So when you get a quote from a freight forwarder, they're going to do their best to try to find you, once you are ready to book, they're going to try to find you that exact service. But sometimes, if you have gone 2 or 3 weeks from getting approval and then you go back to the freight forwarder and say, okay, it's ready to ship, the rate might change. So just make sure you have the right clauses. And then yes, freight forwarders, another tip, they can be an inclusive service to assist you with door to door. That's a great sales tool too. I'll just point that out. Like, if you have that ability to get your product from door to door and your customer doesn't have to fuss with the logistics side of things. They only have to file the import clearance with their customs broker. That's a huge competitive advantage for you. Okay, so export checklist, again, same format, the 4 main things. Export plan and compliance, we kind of went through all of that. Make sure, again, that you understand the Incoterm that you're putting on there, and that you understand what you're responsible for. There is going to be another document. It's going to be called a shipper's letter of instruction. I put that kind of up here because I want you to be aware of what it is. Some forwarders use it, some forwarders don't. We use it because I feel like it really helps the exporter to understand all the data they're giving us, but it helps our team too to make sure that we're compliant and mitigating risk and miscommunication. But essentially, it comes in different formats, like an Excel sheet or a PDF or a Word document, and you're going to fill out what your commodity is and where it's shipping to, who the buyer and seller is, and ultimately, it's all of the information that we need to have in order to clear your product with U.S. Customs for export, which is called it's that all of that is done through the automated export system with customs. So, but that's a whole nother webinar. So documents would be the next thing. Making sure you're going to have a commercial invoice, that harmonized tariff schedule code. Like I mentioned, you're going to have that. Again, when you're doing these export plans or you're doing these communications, if you're an importer with a foreign seller, you're going to come across this code at some point. If you don't, here's where you would stop and say, okay, wait a minute, we have to determine this commodity code. There's also a great website. I didn't link it here, but if you go to, it's the usitc.gov, they have a harmonized tariff schedule tool. That's amazing. You will have to have a packing list. Certificate of origin for some countries require it, some don't. And then again, you may have to have other certificates. Always ask your buyer overseas if any certificates are required. You can also ask your freight forwarder too. Sometimes our export clients will ask us, hey, we're shipping to a new market. Can you double check if we need this? And then what we do is actually go to a partner who's a registered customs broker and in that particular country to say, here's all the information, please advise what certificates are needed. And then bill of lading. So this is not something that you'll produce, but this is a document that you will get. It's something either your freight forwarder or your carrier is going to do for you. And then shipping quotations. Once you're ready to export and the goods have been either started production or they're finished with production, that's when you'll reach out to freight forwarders for a quote or carriers. Again, same thing as import. You're going to need the origin and destination address, packing list, if you have them would be great, delivery due dates, commodity codes, and value of the product. Again, most of that information is already going to be on a shipper's letter of instruction, so don't be surprised when a freight forwarder says, hey, great, we would love to move forward with your freight quotation. Now can you fill out this shipper letter of instruction? And then after the shipment has been picked up, I always say another big piece to export is that service piece. Providing your buyer with tracking, making sure that you're saying, you know, hey, buyer B, by the way, the ship just departed port today. It looks like it's going to arrive to Italy, 10:31. Here's all the documents. Please let us know if you need anything else. And then just really confirming that they've received those goods in good condition. As a side note, a lot of freight forwarders and ocean carriers, if you're going to file a claim, some have clauses. Some might be 30 days, some might be 60 days from delivery, and some might be a little bit longer, like 120 days. You have to declare any damage to file a claim within that time frame. Okay, and now really quickly, because I really want to leave time for your questions, I'm going to go through global freight very quickly. Like I said, everyone, this would almost be its own webinar separately, and I would have a ton of fun with this one too. And I'm sure you all will have lots of questions on this aspect of the slide. So we've talked import, export. Now let's go into the global freight piece of it. It's kind of that last piece we really need to focus on. So modes of transportation. global freight is essentially ocean freight, air freight. If you're looking at, Canada and Mexico, obviously things can go by truck and rail too. But modes of transportation within ocean freight, and I'll debunk these terms. You have what we call a full container load, which is FCL, and a less than container load, which is LCL. So a full container load would be you have, let's say 40 cubic meters. Let's call it 30 pallets of goods, and you're ready to ship. And you're like, which mode of transportation do I need? Typically, when you're shipping higher volumes, you're obviously going to get your own container. That's the full container load. You're leasing out that container for your product only. I would say the majority of people that are sort of shipping internationally would ship FCL. A lot that are a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of e-commerce will actually ship less than container load. It's smaller, so you might only have a couple pallets, and you're going to share a container with other shippers. The benefit to it, though, is you get a lower price because you're only paying for your space in that container. So less than container load, full container load are those two modes. And then with air freight, typically, that's a little bit different. There are chartered air freights. They're wildly expensive. I would not recommend them unless you absolutely have to for some reason. But mainly air freight actually ships in essentially courier or what we call commercial air freight. So courier would be FedEx, UPS, DHL. They're going to be your small packages. They actually do a full service for you on a lot of their sites. So they'll do the customs broker for you. You can create your documents for your shipment on their websites. Now with air freight, commercial air freight, that's a little bit different. That is essentially you would come to a freight forwarder and you would say, okay, I have 6 pallets. Here's the total weight. Here's what it is. I need it shipped from here to here. Can you quote this? And then the forwarder is going to give you different options. Here's different options for transit times, for airlines. Typically, air freight rates are done by the weight. So let's say your shipment is 1,000 kilos or 1,000 kilograms. The freight forwarder might price out and say, okay, the air rate is $5 per kilogram. So it would essentially be taking that 1,000 kilograms and multiplying it by $5. And that's going to be your air freight cost. Lots of fees go into both modes of transportation, of course. I like to break it down, and at our company, we do things very, very simplistic because we don't want to send our clients an invoice with 15 line items of every single terminal fee. What we try to do is group it into buckets. And so we have our essentially what we call the origin services, which is picking up from a facility, doing the export customs, any terminal fees overseas. Then we have the main carriage, which is the ocean freight or the air freight or the ground freight. And then we have customs clearance as a line item. Obviously, duty and any sort of customs fees are passed through. You should never, and your forwarder should be giving you backup to your customs filing. So that you can double check that. And then finally, you'll see usually there's like a ground transportation or delivery fee. For documentation, usually with global freight, bills of lading are the most important key part of it. As you saw in that video, it's essentially the receipt telling all the carriers and the buyer and seller, here is who is responsible for the goods during transit. You have a house bill of lading and a master bill of lading. And again, this would be its own webinar, which hopefully you all want me back and I can do a webinar on that subject too. But essentially, just for you to know, the master bill of lading is really, it's a bill of lading between carrier to carrier. So for example, if we're shipping with Maersk shipping line, we would have a master bill of lading that's going to show between Maersk or their offices overseas, and Global Gateway Logistics would be the consignee or the person responsible. And then the house bill of lading is actually going to be where it is for an import. Let's say it's your buyer overseas, and then your importer of record. So if you have Susie Cakes and you're importing cake stands, but you actually filed your importer of record under Susie's LLC business, you want Susie's LLC business to be that consignee on that house bill. And don't worry, do not fret. A freight forwarder will help you. If you just say, hey, can you make sure all my documents are correct? That's our job. We're here to provide you that compliance and to help you make sure you're doing everything correctly. Bills of lading are huge. We need bills of lading to clear things at ports. There has to be a bill of lading release too. So another thing we didn't quite get into on this because it's a little bit more in depth, but buyers and sellers can agree upon payment terms that can go into the bill of lading. So let's say if it's something where the buyers are waiting for a payment, they can hold up that house bill of lading and they can say to the freight forwarders or the carriers, do not release that, which means we can't clear your product yet. We can't deliver it until they release it. So just make sure that you're aware of the documentation risk in the bill of lading. You're also going to have a freight forwarder is going to ask you for a commercial invoice, a packing list. Again, in some cases, a certificate of origin. Without a doubt, commercial invoice and packing list and bill of lading are the three aspects you will always, always, always have to have. And then of course, if there's other documentation that comes about, never be afraid. Like we always tell our clients, no question is a stupid question. If they say, hey, Caitlin, I have a stupid question, I'm like, it's not, it's valid. It's part of your compliance. And then for cost. So some things to note with global freight. There are, it depends on the mode too, but you can sign contracts. Typically contracts are for higher volume, but it's not the higher volume of, a Target or Walmart. It can be just higher volume in the terms of maybe you're starting to ship 50 containers a year, 100 containers a year, 200 containers a year. You can have different contracts that help lock in a price for you. There's always pros and cons to it, right? Because if you're locked into a price, you may not be able to take advantage if we have something called the spot market. So we have contract rates and then we have spot rates. Spot rates are, think of it as like maybe current inventory sales pricing, right? And so maybe a carrier wants to lower their price because they need to fill their capacity. Or maybe they're raising their price because there's an issue at port and they can't unload these containers fast enough. Just know that costs change daily, no matter what the product is, what the service is, the mode of transportation. Always double check costs with your forwarder just to make sure they haven't changed. And then always push back on the forwarder if they have changed and say, listen, I have to go to my client now and tell my client these costs have changed. Please give us either what we'll provide sometimes is something on letterhead that says, here's why the cost changed. But nonetheless, they should at least be giving you that education that you need to be able to go back to your buyer or seller and explain the situation. Oh, I'm not going to go through all of this, but basically we kind of I just summarized the process of a shipment for import and export. So you get all of your product complete and the product details. Then you go out for shipping costs. You determine what your responsibilities are. You book that with the carrier or the freight forwarder. And then the cargo is actually, the freight forwarder takes care of it from there. The cargo is picked up by the freight forwarder. They provide all the services you need them to provide. And same thing for export. And then once it arrives for import, once it arrives to the US, it goes through customs clearance. Duty is assessed. Usually duty, it depends. If you sign up for customs ACH program, it's just sort of an automatic filing and it gets billed to you the following month. If you have your freight forwarders do it, just note some freight forwarders charge a duty advance fee because they have to pay that duty very quickly for you. And sometimes it can be costly. And then yes, the same thing for an export, it goes through that customs clearance process. Last slide, I really wanted to give you guys some resources. I know I spoke on a lot of these things earlier. Again, U.S. Commercial Service focuses on promoting trade. They work with the International Trade Administration. They do your foreign research, your education, your export readiness, and more. The U.S. International Trade Commission, that USITC website I told you guys about, that's where you're going to find harmonized tariff information, tools, and training. I guarantee you, if you Googled it, that website would just pop up right there. Customs and Border Protection, if you need help, if you want customs to sign off on your tariff code and you just want that extra guide, they will help you with that too, free of charge. Freight forwarders, these entities can answer most of the questions you have in global trade, not just in global shipping. Okay, we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Molly, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah. I mean, Caitlin, that was fantastic. And we do have a lot of questions. I'm going to start with one that sort of zooms us out a little bit and
Sure.
came from Joanne in the chat. Joanne is looking to import wine from France. And it really, I guess the high level is many people might find this entire topic intimidating. So if you're someone in Joanne's shoes looking to import wine from France, as an example, what kinds of vendors does she need? What are the very fundamental things she should be looking to set up first?
Sure. Well, Joanne, I want to come to your house and enjoy some of this French wine with you. I'll just put that out there. But I will tell you, that's a great question. It depends. There's personal use and commercial use, and that's also a difference too. If you're importing this wine for personal use and you say, I just, these are personal goods, I want them for my wine cellar. Typically, what I will recommend, wine is, and again, this goes to very geographically centered commodities. So in Italy, it is very and with the US, it's very difficult to import and export alcohol. Italy has it down pat. They and I was just over there, and I know this because I spoke with a wine exporter. And so what he was saying is essentially they have to have their license in Italy. It is going to be easiest for you to request from the seller if they could possibly facilitate that export for you. If they say, no, sorry, we can't, they at a very minimum are going to have to give you all the information you're going to need to give to either a US customs broker, freight forwarder, however you handle it. With wine, I will also say too, there's very commodity specific shipping companies. You can always send me, I'm sure TBF is, and by the way, you're welcome to share my email, TBF. But if they don't, they can put you in touch with me and I can maybe guide you into some of those curated companies that do that. But we want you to have your wine. So we'll definitely guide you in the right direction of some resources overseas.
Yeah. And Caitlin, I think that brings me to a great next question. You've mentioned the importance of a freight forwarder several times in this process. What should somebody tuning in today be looking for in a freight forwarding partner? What are the questions you would recommend somebody ask to find the right company to support their business and their endeavors?
Great question. Thank you for that question, Molly.
Okay.
We take freight forwarding so seriously. It's why I started my company. It's why I took a total leap of faith to do this, because I saw that there were so many freight forwarding companies that were not operating in the way that I felt freight forwarders should. And that means going above and beyond for service. So when you're looking at interviewing different freight forwarders, and by the way, it's okay to have more than one freight forwarder. Don't let any freight forwarder tell you you can only work with them.
Okay.
Now, a couple things that we always look at, right, is we always ask our potential new clients, what is your main focus? What are your pain points right now if you're currently shipping? Is it price? Is it service? Is it transparency? Those are really three massive components to a great freight forwarder. So for price, pricing, like I said, it can change every day. And let me tell you, everyone, there are some forwarders that do not include all of the cost up front. They want to win your business and they want to be able to say, oh, well, we're the lowest cost. Here you go. Well, then when you compare apples to apples with that freight invoice and you go back to a freight forwarder you might have used, or you might have used for a quotation, and you say, wait a minute, this company actually had all of the fees, but this company didn't quote us any of the fees, but now they're billing us for all the fees. And now freight forwarder B is actually more economical. So just be aware when you're looking for freight forwarders, go out and get several quotes from different freight forwarders, but make sure you're comparing apples to apples. That's my first piece of advice. Communication. So much to our dismay, we are available 24/7. And we literally say that because we give out work cell phones, office cell phones, Microsoft Teams chats. We want our clients to be able to say, hey, I have an emergency right now in China at my factory. Is anyone up and able to help us? And now we have teams overseas that are actually up in those time zones. So it's always a good thing too to look for freight forwarders that are available around the clock, or at a very minimum, who are you going to call after 5 p.m. Monday through Friday US time if you have an emergency with your shipment? That's definitely a question I would ask a freight forwarder. And then, just talk about flexibility when you're interviewing a freight forwarder. What are freight forwarders' payment terms? Are they flexible with them? Can you provide training? What additional services you do? For example, our team actually, we provide for clients that are curious and wanting it, we can actually provide a Power BI dashboard tool for them that at the end of the year, it will essentially take all of the data we have in our transportation management system and really look at it in a very beautiful way for your company to make decisions off of, to say, wow, we spent 25% more in air freight than we wanted to for our freight budget this year. Or it just simplifies your freight budget because we're telling you, hey, you don't have to look through all your freight bills here in one spreadsheet or one platform. You can see this is what you've spent for the entire year in shipping. And then we'll work together for a plan for your shipping next year. So those are just some really cool outside of the box things that you could be asking a freight forwarder for.
What I love about that, Caitlin, is that what you're describing is finding a team who is going to get you, your business, and want to see you win
Yeah.
as much as they want to see their own business win, which is incredible. I'm conscious of time, and there are so many questions.
Sure.
We will share your information with everyone in the chat, but I cannot thank you enough for being here, sharing your wisdom, and trying to break down what is, as we know, a bear of a topic into just an hour.
I thank you so much, Molly. And I've seen so many comments of people going, oh my gosh, this is so much. This is intimidating. Do not worry. I am always available this is a passion project of mine, is to always really give this type of advice to businesses, because the way we look at it, if we can't help entrepreneurs and small businesses grow with best practices in logistics, you'll never be able to get off the ground and scale globally and scale your firm. So just know that, you now have a friend, a fairy godmother in freight that is willing to help with anything.